Hello, welcome to this week's episode of The India Story, the show where we track the latest developments in the world's largest democracy, this for a global audience. We also speak to the biggest newsmakers from India, and today we have for you Jyotiraditya Scindia. Now, the India story is a unique one, of course, because this, a country with more than 1.4 billion people, thousands of cultures, languages, interests, issues, problems, but also an infinite potential for growth. Last week, we covered the chapter about India's exponentially growing road network. Today's story is similar, but on a different level, quite literally. This week, we analyze the airline industry, the civil aviation sector in India, and what many people believe could also be a very sharp growth in air traffic, in airports, in passengers, and also in infrastructure. And we have a great show lined up for you today, starting with an exclusive conversation with the Union Minister for Civil Aviation, Jyotiraditya Scindia. Also on the program, one of the biggest success stories coming from India, one that you do not want to miss. India is now home to 3,167 tigers, 200 more than it had 4 years ago, but more importantly, way more than double the numbers in 2006. Now, this success in being able to save the tiger being attributed to the roaring success of 50 years of Project Tiger, and also to a nationwide will and nationwide campaign to draw awareness to the tiger. We talked to S.P. Yadav, the Additional Director General of the project, on how the program has saved the Indian tiger. Also on the program, a special chat with an environmentalist, someone who worked on the tiger cause, an actor who's just come out with one of her new films, Dia Mirza. Stick with us. It's going to be a power-packed show. But before we take you through any of this, a quick look at some of the top headlines from India that you should be tracking wherever in the world you are. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak agreed to resolve outstanding issues in the India-UK Free Trade Agreement negotiations. The next round of trade talks begin from the 28th of April. India is witnessing a fresh bout of COVID. There's a spike in daily infection numbers, and the positivity rate has also gone up in the past few weeks, but hospitalization remains low, as do deaths from COVID. Indian cinema continues to reign supreme. Superstar Shah Rukh Khan and master storyteller S.S. Rajamouli make it to the Time magazine's World's 100 Most Influential People of 2023. The Kolkata Metro scripts history yet again. It successfully runs an underwater for the very first time. Remember, this comes nearly 40 years after the Metro started its Indian journey from the same city, Kolkata. All right, I'm going to now bring you our special interview with the Civil Aviation Minister, Jyotiraditya Scindia. But before I do that, I just want to put these things into a certain amount of perspective. 15, 20, 30 years ago, if anybody had asked you what are the biggest factors that are holding back the India story, people would have said infrastructure. Look at the roads, look at the airports, the worst airports in the world. Look at trains, look at ports, look at... Basically, infrastructure was the big issue. I've been at Davos many times. People used to say, why can't India fix its infrastructure? Now, the good news, and this is the big picture, is that has started to be sorted out across the board when it comes to power, when it comes to the railways, when it comes to ports, when it comes to the roads, as we were discussing last week. Infrastructure is gradually, actually not even gradually, rather fast, becoming an area which is not holding back the India story, but actually contributing to its acceleration. And keeping that in mind, let's now turn our attention to civil aviation, because airports, airlines, this was an area which was holding India back. India used to have the worst airports in the world. Now, many people would say it has some of the best airports in the world. Look at the airlines. The quality of Air India had deteriorated so sharply. Indian Airlines, you could barely fly in those. They've been privatized now, and hopefully the quality will start to come up. And that infrastructure push is happening across the civil aviation sector. I'm just going to give you some quick statistics. India is already the world's third largest air passenger market. We provide direct connectivity to more than 40 nations, indirect connectivity to more than 100 countries. The number of airports in the country has gone up from 74 in 2014 to 147 in 2022. And in many cases, the quality of those airports has also shot up quite substantially over the last 20 years or 25 years. And that's also been really notable. At 13.6 crore, air passenger traffic in India saw a 60% growth in 22-23. 15 airlines operated nearly 10 lakh flights in 2022, marking a 21% increase compared to 2021. However, domestic air passenger traffic is still 4% below pre-COVID levels, and that is something that has to be looked at. Passenger capacity at 6 major airports in India, though, is 19.2 crore. So all of this is going up, and it's crystal clear that the civil aviation sector is poised for a period of fairly extensive growth. And schemes like Udan that have been announced by the government of India could actually boost that even more dramatically. You could have aviation markets opening up in areas that had never been opened up. A large number of new airports are coming in there. But why should you be interested in this wherever in the world you are? Because it's not just within India that the Indian civil aviation industry is making waves. India's growth story in air travel is providing a fillip to the global industry as well, specifically to aircraft manufacturers. In February this year, Air India announced the largest commercial aviation deal, not just in India, but in the world. The Tata-owned airline is buying 470 new planes from Airbus and Boeing. The deal likely to support 10 lakh jobs across 44 states in America. And that's not all, because there are around 1,200 aircraft on order by various Indian airlines. Indigo, for example, ordered 500. Go First, buying 72 planes. Akasa Air is going to acquire 56. Now, Vistara is buying 17. Of course, we'll have to see how that plays out with the merger. Upshot, this is going to have a hectic and a massive impact on the job market, both in India and across the world. And within India, there's a welcome change from reports of layoffs, because as Air India continues to proceed, that particular, the revitalization of Air India alone could be creating lakhs of jobs in India, according to some estimates. Look, this is all the good news. There seems to be a lot of activity, a lot of growth, a lot of buoyancy in the Indian aviation sector. Because so far what I've been telling you about is clear skies for the Indian aviation story, but there are some dark clouds also there, some turbulence that will have to be navigated. In recent weeks and months, there have been frequent reports of flyer misbehavior, for example, and more worrying allegations of apathy by the flight crew. That is something that needs to be turned attention to. Customer service in general. Then there are technical slags in many airlines. SpiceJet, for example, operated at 50% capacity for much of 2022. There have also been safety concerns expressed in some areas. In 2021, near 40 near-collision incidents were reportedly investigated by the authorities. And on the economic front, the finances of airlines have been under stress for a while, and they could be affected by higher ATF prices and also by the depreciation of the rupee. Indian airlines across the board are projected to see a consolidated loss of something like $1.6 to $1.8 billion in 2023. Also, some experts are pointing out that only 4% of Indians actually fly. Now, that you could say that shows a very low penetration, which is true. It could also be seen positively, of course, because you can say that's such a large unserved market, people who can then go out and start to fly. So what's going to happen next? Is Indian aviation poised for takeoff? Is it already cruising? What lies ahead? Well, who better to put those questions to than the Civil Aviation Minister, Jyotiraditya Scindia. And I got a chance to catch up with him for a fairly detailed interview on what lies ahead. I'm just going to play that entire interview for you right now. And to try and understand what exactly is happening in the civil aviation sector in India, who better to talk to than the Minister for Civil Aviation, also of Steel, Jyotiraditya Scindia. Pleasure to have you with us, and thank you so much. I'm going to talk to you about infrastructure and flights and the big orders that are being done. But should we start off with passenger experience? And right now, one of the major irritants in passenger experience seems to be from other passengers. And what's happening? People, attacking members of the crew, urinating on people. Passenger behavior seems to have gone down the trail.
So first of all, Vikram, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure, as always, to be with you. I think this is more of a societal issue rather than a sectoral issue. I think we must remember that when we use public transport, whether it be buses, trains, or automobiles, or planes, we must be responsible not only towards ourselves, but towards other co-passengers, human beings, and society. And yes, you do have those stray incidents, and this happens, as you've probably experienced yourself in the last couple of months on a worldwide basis. We have very strict, what we call in our civil aviation parlance, CARS, which is the civil aviation rules that are in place for action on these fronts. First of all, of course, is the airline's responsibility to report any such untoward incident. Once the airline does so through the pilot or the crew, then the civil authorities take over, and according to the Act, cases are filed or action is taken against the perpetrators, stroke perpetrators. And in all of these cases, such action has been taken. There have been a few cases where the airline has not complied with its responsibility of reporting such incidents. And in those cases, action even against the airline and the pilot and the crew has been taken by DGCA. So we are extremely clear in our mindset that there is zero tolerance for such behavior. And when this does happen, then we will certainly take action in the strictest possible manner.
So zero tolerance is something which you're saying. What do you think lies behind it? I mean, in some cases, just people drinking too much. In some cases,
it's mostly people who are inebriated. In some cases, a certain incident happens and it sparks an altercation. But in each and every case, action is and will be taken.
One of the things, of course, that you're going to have to do when it comes to this aspect of behavior, these are people who are just clearly doing something wrong and action needs to be taken about them. But as your efforts to democratize civil aviation spread, as more and more people start to get onto the plane for the first time, then that certain amount of education will have to be there. Because sometimes it could be, in these cases, people are doing something wrong. They're just doing something wrong. In other cases, it could be they don't know what to do necessarily. So that's education.
There are probably, I may be going a little too far, but there are probably nil cases in that aspect.
Do you think so?
Yes. I think even thousands of first-time flyers, and I'll give you the example of Udan. Since Udan took off in 2016, we've had 220,000 flights. We've had 1.17 crore flyers who have benefited from Udan, 473 new routes that have been plied that probably would never have been plied before. 74 new airports, waterdromes, and heliports that have been built in our portfolio through Udan. But I would say it is probably extremely rare, or probably no case of first-time flyers that have exhibited this sort of behavior.
So the people who are for the first time getting into a plane, who've never done it, they are still managing to follow the rules and do things correctly.
It is people like you and I who travel many times.
The spoiled, privileged types,
exactly.
Having a drink too many, you think it's there, jante nahi ho main kaun hu, and misbehaving.
Or there's an altercation, or fuses run high, and an incident happens.
Let's move to the other aspect of the passenger experience, which is obviously the entire journey from coming to the airport, going through the airport, getting onto the plane, the quality of service that you're getting. And obviously it's improving, and it's improving dramatically. What's your vision on that? How do you see us heading forward?
So there are two segments of the value chain. One is the person who's desirous of traveling by air. The other is the service provider, which is the airline, that is desirous of taking people on its infrastructure from one point to the other. In between both of these parts of the value chain sits the infrastructure of the airport. Now, generally across the world, the airport is a single airport in that particular city, except for rather big cities like New York or maybe now Delhi and Bombay coming up with two airports. Goa already has two airports. So I think that if you are the single gateway in that city, on you lies the responsibility to make sure that you are able to connect the desire of an individual with the service provider's desire to service that individual. And that you must do in the best possible manner to facilitate that process. Make that experience one such that the customer wants to travel again. We have seen a huge expansion in our infrastructure network in the country over the last 9 years. A country that had 74 airports built in 65 years of its independence. In the last 9 years, we have, under the Prime Minister's vision, doubled that number to 148, comprising of 74 new airports, waterdromes, and heliports. And therefore, it's been an exponential growth curve. And let me, through you, also inform our viewers that this is only the beginning of the journey. Our target is to take that number of 148, number of 74, which has gone to 148, upwards of 200 in the next 3 to 4 years. So massive infrastructure is being built. But as we build that infrastructure, we must make the experience of the traveler also seamless through the airport. Which is why in the last year and a half, I have looked at the full operations process. We had certain clogging, if you will, or congestion in a number of airports last heavy season, October, November, because we were able to achieve numbers that were unfathomable before. Pre-COVID, our high was 420,000 odd passengers on a particular day. We broke that on multiple times during high season and then crested that actually in off season to almost 460,000.
And that will only continue as more and more people are traveling, as more and more happens.
Absolutely. So therefore, airports need to be constantly upgrading themselves, need to create many more entryways into airports, need to create many more check-in counters, need to create many more security lanes, and also make boarding much more easier. So 2 or 3 steps that we have taken. One, we have increased the number of entry gates in our metro airports, which were earlier restricted. Second, the security lines, which in an airport like Delhi, which is the largest airport in the country today.
And among the top now increasingly in the world in terms of traffic.
70 million today, going to 109 million by this October, hopefully. One of the largest airports in the world. It'll be close to being beyond Atlanta. There were only 12 security lines for the large number of traffic that was coming through. And I myself, as you remember, visited the airport, and in a period of almost about 2 months, we've increased from 12 security lines to 25 security lines. That certainly cuts down the congestion. So therefore, you've got to look at it from an operations exercise point of view, look at where the bottlenecks are along the critical path and provide access and opening up of those bottlenecks. So for example, in the Delhi airport, much to a lot of people's chagrin, I broke down the VIP lounge. And in that VIP lounge, we put in 5 security lines. So for me, the common passenger is most important. Along with that, what we've introduced, just to finish off on that, to make the process much more seamless, is a new FRT, facial recognition technology system called DigiYatra, where from your home, when you upload all your information, you can seamlessly pass through from entry to check-in to security to your boarding gate to boarding the flight, all in a period of within 5 to 10 minutes, as opposed to going through a long experience. That's been introduced in 3 airports until 31st of March. I've introduced it in 4 more airports on the 31st of March. So 7 airports in the country now have DigiYatra operating.
So that's why we might need to find. So DigiYatra is one way that you let people use their faces to speed the entire process up. The other is to look at certain things and see whether they're required. You'll remember till, 10, 15 years ago, that, every time you landed in India, you had to fill out that disembarkation card, which has now been done away with. So the checking of people entering the airports, you think that is something that will continue to be required for security reasons and to prevent problems?
Yes and no. Certainly, yes, if you've not adopted DigiYatra. And if you have, then your entry is much more easier and much quicker. And I'm kind of amazed at the adoption rate of DigiYatra, whereas in airports like Delhi and Bangalore, which see a huge amount of throughput, the adoption rates within 2 to 3 months of putting in place DigiYatra is close to about 10% or 11% of all flyers. In a place like Varanasi, and I must congratulate my airport director there, she's a lady, the adoption rate is close to 45%. So almost 1 in every 2 flyers in Varanasi is using DigiYatra. And therefore, with 4 more airports coming online now in the second round, I think you're going to see much more, and I think this is the need of the hour because we've got to make the system much more facilitatory.
When we're looking at now the growth that you're talking about, there's domestic travel, which Udaan and others are there, and I'm going to talk about that. But let's just look at international. Internationally, so many people flying to the US or Europe or any other place tend to go through the Middle East. They're flying on Emirates, they're flying on Etihad, they're flying on those airlines. Those planes seem to be filled with Indians. Surely one of the parts that we should be thinking about is point to point directly from India, fly directly to the US. Why are you going via the Middle East or any other place?
So you're absolutely right, Vikram. I think if you look at the analysis of the civil aviation industry in India, like all other industries across the spectrum, this industry also follows an S-shaped growth curve. The bottom end of the S is when an industry is in its infancy, and therefore growth is kind of almost flat or slow growth, the delta, the slope. Then you come to the middle part of the S when the industry goes through growth phase. And then the top part of the S is when an industry approaches maturity, and therefore growth flattens out again. India, I believe, is in that inflection point between infancy and the growth phase. We have now entered the growth phase. And I believe that the growth rate in India is going to be exponential. Having said that, I think this is also a troubled legacy of the past. In the past, I believe that we've given out too much on many of our bilaterals. And therefore, I think it's important to do 2 things. One, to ensure that Indian carriers grow their wide-bodied aircraft, and that's something that I have been pushing for the last 1.5 years that I have been here. And I'm really glad to see airlines such as Air India and Indigo. Air India has posted the largest order not in Indian civil aviation history, but global civil aviation history of 470 aircraft, 250 with Airbus and 220 with Boeing. Between the two, almost 60 to 80 wide-bodied aircraft. And therefore, Air India is going to make a huge foray on direct routes. Indigo is also getting into wide-bodied aircraft. And therefore, they're also going to go across the 7 seas. And I think that is extremely important for India to be able to create its own hub for its own travelers.
But based on your understanding, somebody watching this in other parts of the world, do you genuinely feel that we are going to be in a situation 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now where India will be a major international aviation hub and Indian airlines, various Indian airlines, will be global standard airlines, and that's what people should be flying, especially when they're coming to India?
Absolutely. I think we are already the 3rd largest domestic aviation market in the world. We have grown from 6 crore flyers in 13-14 to almost 14.5 crore flyers today. So we've more than doubled the market in the last 8 or 9 years, COVID notwithstanding. On the international side, we are at roughly 6 crore flyers, so we are at roughly 20.5 crore flyers. I see this growing to 40 crores over the next 4 to 5 years. So that's the potential of the market. We have grown our fleet size from 400 in 13-14 by almost 75% to 700. With these large orders of Air India and Indigo and Akasa and SpiceJet, I'm looking at a capacity addition of at least another 1,000 to 1,300 planes over the next 5 to 8 years. So I see our fleet going to 2,000 in the next 7 to 8 years. And therefore, yes, India will be a major market, not only for Asia, but for the world. Also do remember, Vikram, that when we talk about an industry, we talk about the market. And when we talk about the market, we talk about penetration. And if you look at penetration in India, when we talk about 14.5 crore flyers, it includes many people like yourself and me who make multiple trips in a year. So if you distill that and you actually look at discrete travelers in the country, that number is not going to be more than roughly about 3 to 4 crores in a country of a population of 130 crores. So what's your penetration rate today? It's hardly 3%, 3 to 4%. So therefore, you've got 96% to go. And today, people are yearning to travel by air. And therefore, the connectivity that the Prime Minister has provided through UDAN, where we have put up airports which were obliterated from the civil aviation map almost 50 years ago, places like Jharsuguda in Orissa, Rupsi in Assam, Kishangarh in Rajasthan, Darbhanga, which are now providing customers ranging between 50,000 to 5.5 lakhs per year from these satellite tier 2, tier 3 airports. And that means that this market is going to grow and connectivity is going to grow. And through that connectivity, people are going to travel much more by air.
So dramatic demand growth is coming, and you're saying that the infrastructure and the capacity and the supply will be there to encourage that. And then it becomes a virtuous cycle.
Correct. I mean, and just a case in point for you, if you take our 6 metros in the country today, we have close to 220 million throughput capability in the 6 metros. So Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, Kolkata. That is going to grow to 440 million by 2030.
Jyotiraj Scindia, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you very much for having me.
All that infrastructure is also going to affect the other ministry which you're looking after, which is steel, but maybe that's a subject for another day.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, that was the Civil Aviation Minister Jyotiraditya Scindia in an exclusive interview. But let me now turn my attention to the next segment that we have for you in the India Story, which is to keep track of what the world is saying about India, the global media in particular. And we're going to try and bring you snippets, not just from the media in the West, but also what is being said in other parts of the world. So let's start, of course, the big headline, I guess, out of India for many publications this week was what happened with the BBC and the Enforcement Directorate starting a new probe under FEMA on the BBC. This after the income tax raid on the BBC a little earlier in the year. Many of the publications making a link between the actions on the BBC and the documentary that had aired on the Gujarat riots a little earlier in the year. America-based Washington Post published an article on the storm whipping around pro-Khalistan preacher Amritpal Singh. This piece in the Washington Post says that some of the supporters of the Khalistan movement are using automated Twitter accounts to promote acts of vandalism and even violence. The Washington Post report adds that Twitter is slow to act against them as the messages are too numerous and the company's safety staff is struggling with reduced strength since Elon Musk's takeover. So automated accounts from members in the Khalistan movement trying to whip up violence. Let's turn our attention now to some of the press coming out of Hong Kong and China, and frankly, you can never expect it to be particularly good about India. So this article in the Hong Kong-based Asian Times insinuated that there are no good jobs in India. Everyone, of course, has been talking about the fact that while China's population is declining, India has the chance to gain the upper hand because of its large young population. This piece in the Asian Times was claiming that India's demographic advantage can turn into a burden if not given quality employment. The author of this article says that only half of India's working age population actually has work, and that 1.2 2 crore jobs need to be created every year. Now, interestingly, China's Daily.com published a report quoting the chief of the World Bank, David Malpass, saying that China and India are the two exceptions to the slowdown that the world has been witnessing this year. Malpass said that while China's economy is rebounding, India continues to be one of the fastest growing major economies. He did say that foreign capital will be required to fund India's growth story, but Malpass did warn that a group of advanced economies are actually swallowing up a lot of the available global capital. And let me now turn my attention to a good news story that I am particularly delighted about. The tiger population in India now stands at 3,167. Remember, the figure was down to just 1,411 in 2006. And that was a time when many people definitely thought that the tiger was in risk of extinction. Now, you would say that 3,167 is not that big a number. And it is true, this is still way lower than what it was at the time of independence. But it's not just a big deal, it's actually a huge success story. And it's a success not just of India, but of the entire world. Let me just put some numbers in front of you to try and bring things into perspective. Tigers once roamed across Asia. Their number was as high as 1 lakh at the start of the 20th century. Although they'd been hunted for nearly 1,000 years, their numbers really began falling very, very steeply as human population, as agricultural expansion, as deforestation, and as infrastructure fragmented tiger habitats. Only 5,000 to 7,500 were left in the wild as the 20th century drew to a close. Now, India is believed to have had a tiger population of around 40,000 at the time of independence. But over subsequent decades, this declined, and it hit a record low of 1,411 in 2006. And at that time, the Panna and the Sariska tiger reserves lost all of their native tigers. Poaching, at this time, unregulated poaching had accelerated the decline in tiger numbers, and there was a real fear of extinction of the tiger. This, by the way, was despite a long period where India had been trying to protect the tiger, ever since Project Tiger was launched. In 1972, India officially banned tiger hunting. The next year, in 1973, India launched Project Tiger, a one-of-its-kind conservation program to save the big cats from going extinct. Initially, the project covered 9 tiger reserves spread around 18,200 square kilometers, but since then, it has become the largest species conservation initiative in the world. Under this project, 27 tiger reserves have by now been established over an area of something like 37,700 square kilometers. At present, India is now home to as many as 53 tiger reserves, covering 75,000 square kilometers. Authorities have relocated and paid entire villages to make space for the tiger. They have created wildlife corridors to link their fragmented habitats. Project Tiger generates more than 45 lakh man-days of employment for local people annually. But as I was saying, by 2006, despite all the efforts that had been taken under Project Tiger, there was a real concern that the tiger was going to go extinct. Since 2006, though, it has been a different story and a very positive story. And specifically, it's been an Indian success story because, unfortunately, in other parts of the world, the tigers haven't really started to rebound. Not quite in the manner that has started to happen in India. And because of the crisis in 2006 and that 1,411 number and the fact that the tigers had gone extinct in places like Panna and in Sariska, there was a nationwide awareness campaign. There was an entire Save the Tiger campaign that started to roll. A lot of awareness was created and people started to worry about the tiger. And that did lead to change. That change is reflected in actual hard numbers. Look at the census. The census initiated under Project Tiger was the first time that real numbers of tiger populations had started to emerge. The comprehensive survey is conducted every 4 years and is based on information collected by wildlife officials across 380,000 square kilometers of land. It also draws on data collected from camera traps in known tiger habitats. The census has revealed that the tiger population has been steadily climbing from 1,411 in 2006 to 1,706 in 2010, signs of stabilization there. Then 2,226 in 2014, 2,967 in 2018, and now 3,167 in 2022. Now, it's an increase of 200 tigers in the last 4 years, but also a sign of some plateauing. It's only about a 4 to 6% growth rate right now in the last 4 years compared to a sharper growth rate earlier. It could be because tiger habitats have started to get crowded. The latest tiger census covered forested habitats in 20 states of the country. A foot survey of some 641,000 kilometers was done looking for carnivore signs in prey abundance. Camera traps were set up at 32,588 locations. They generated 47 million photographs, of which 97,000 were of tigers, they noted. Clearly, the conservation efforts have paid off, and India has every reason to be proud of that. At least for the moment, it seems that the tiger is safe from extinction. But, and this is an important but, some concerns still remain. India is now home to 70% of the world's wild tiger population, which stands at about 4,500. But those numbers are on only 25% of the total tiger habitat. What does that mean? India's tiger numbers are actually very high compared to the rest of the world, but the tiger habitat is small compared to the rest of the world. The rest of the world needs to get their tiger number up, and India needs to get the tiger habitat up. Not only the core zones, but even the buffer zones are now seeing an explosion in the tiger population. More and more tigers are coming into the buffer zones. That means there is a chance of human-animal conflict because tigers are solitary and territorial creatures. They roam, they go from one place to the other. As their population increases and as the basic core tiger reserves become overcrowded, the tigers will try and find other places to go. And that means they could come into conflict with humans. Also, you will have other issues. The worsening climate crisis spells trouble for all vulnerable habitats, and that is still a problem. Illegal poaching still continues, although it is down from what it was in that 2006 to 2008 period, and it still does exist, and it is not something that can be ruled out completely. Well, who better to tell us about the future of the tiger in India than Dr. S.P. Yadav, Member Secretary of the Tiger Conservation Authority, who's been very, very closely involved with Project Tiger and playing an important role in saving the tiger. Dr. Yadav, thank you so much for joining us. So, a proud moment, there's some plateauing in growth, but 3167 compared to 1,411. I look back at that period, 2006, 2008, 2010, when it looked like the tiger was about to go extinct in India. The campaigns and the efforts that people have put in, it seems that the situation is much better now.
Yeah, thank you, Vikram. It's definitely a remarkable turnaround because tiger population is still endangered at the global level. The tiger population in several countries is going down. In some countries, it is either stable or almost extinct. So the achievement of India is definitely praiseworthy.
All right, sir. Now, when I look back to that period, 2000 to 2010, when we were doing the Save the Tiger campaigns and things like that, it was very clear that what was leading to the immediate crisis were poaching gangs. Panna, Sariska, poaching gangs had wiped out all tigers out there. Is that under control now? Have the poaching gangs, the organized poaching gangs, have they been tackled?
You are right. We lost all our tigers in Sariska Tiger Reserves way back in 2005, and the same thing was repeated in Panna. We lost all our tigers in 2008. But this Sariska Tiger Reserves debacle was kind of eye-opener, and the government of India appointed a task force, and our Wildlife Protection Act was amended. And then the this saw that creation of National Tiger Conservation Authority and Wildlife Crime Control Bureau, and things have changed a lot from that time. Now the poaching is very, very controlled. There is if you compare the past with the present, I would say that poaching has gone down in our country. In fact, in our country, the poaching takes place not because there is demand in our country, but demand exists in other consumer countries. That leads poaching in India. So, but the situation is satisfactory now. But I would say that poaching is still the biggest threat. We cannot be complacent, and we cannot. So we need to be smarter than poachers.
So poaching, you are saying, is somewhat under control, although we have to be watchful. The other challenge at that time when the tiger was in crisis used to be the question around forest guards. There weren't enough forest guards. Large number of national parks and reserves did not have the guards that they needed, which is why the tiger was under threat. What is the situation on that right now? Do you think there's enough personnel now to be able to protect the tigers?
In fact, tigers are found in 18 of our states, and the situation is improving. But I won't say that it is satisfactory. Many states, they have done fresh recruitment and positions are filled, but many states, they are still coming up with recruitment and still they are filling the seat. But the government of India provides generous support to the state government through the ongoing centrally sponsored scheme of Project Tiger. And these vacant positions, the state governments, they deploy the contractual employees or casual employees to compensate the gap in the staffing pattern.
So let me now move on to the next major risk factor for the tiger, which is, of course, around animal-human conflict. Now, that used to be a challenge when tigers, and still is a challenge, when tigers come out of their zones and come into conflict with humans or kill cattle, and then sometimes villagers would try and poison the tigers and kill them in retaliation. That's regrettable. How do you rate that? Is that still a risk factor that we need to worry about right now, or has that stabilized?
I would say that because of this increasing population of tigers in certain pockets of the country, the biggest challenge today before the protected area manager is the human-tiger conflict. As far as tiger conservation or tiger reserve management goes, there are certain areas where the tigers, as you very well know, that when the cubs are born, the cubs, they remain with the mother for 2 to 3 years. Then after that, they disperse. Tiger is a solitary animal. So they disperse in order to establish their own territory. They are territorial animals. So if they fight with the existing territorial tigers, dominant tigers, if they succeed, they establish their territory inside. If they don't succeed in that fight or struggle, they move outside. That's why we need the corridors. Once they move outside, seldom it happens that they stray into the human-dominated landscapes and conflict takes place. Also, the aged old tigers or injured tigers, which are not able to hunt in the wild, they often come out into the human-dominated landscape. And but let me tell you that because of our funding support, National Tiger Conservation Authority has also developed standard operating procedure. We are continuously supporting the state governments for the capacity building of staff. There are early warning systems, alert systems deployed in the fields. So we are fully prepared to take on head-on this challenge of human-tiger conflict. But still, it is definitely an issue which requires a lot of attention from the field staff and the functionaries. And technology is helping a lot in tackling human-tiger conflict.
So there would be two possible ways of doing that then, right? One is the natural migration of tigers, which would require corridors. So as tigers become heavily populated in one particular area, they can move from high density to low density areas through wildlife corridors. That's one option. Second option is to do, for example, what's been done with the cheetahs, where you actually, tranquilize a tiger and then move the tiger to a completely new location. Which of the two do you think you're going to be trying, or will you try both?
Oh, you're absolutely right. It's not that either of one, it's both. Through corridors, the natural dispersal of tigers takes place. But if you see the Sariska and Panna, we were the first in the world to successfully reintroduce tigers here. And we brought tigers. We lifted them from Chopper and from Ranthambore to Sariska and from Bandhavgarh and Kanha to Panna Tiger Reserves. We shifted them, and it means artificial efforts were made. So both the efforts, either way, is important to make a balance of tiger population in the country. And if you see recently also, we have translocated and released tigers in Maghav National Park. See Mukundra Tiger Reserve in Rajasthan, Ramgarh Vishdhari Tiger Reserve in Rajasthan. They were very, density was very low. We translocated tigers. from Ranthambore, where population is increasing, to Ramgarh Vishdhari and Mukundara, and similarly on the western part of Rajaji, we brought and translocated tigers from Corbett Tiger Reserves. So besides the natural dispersal of tigers through corridors, we are supplementing the augmenting tiger population through these means using technology and all scientific monitoring of the population.
Well, Dr. Yadav, thank you so much for joining us, and let's hope all your efforts continue to be really, really successful and that these wonderful animals do thrive. Thank you for being with us. Well, let me get another perspective in on that story, and it's a great pleasure to be talking to somebody who's been very actively involved, not just with the Save Our Tiger campaign, but with many, many environmental campaigns, and her film Bheed has just been out in the recent past. I'm talking, of course, about Dia Mirza, and it's great to be joined by her right now. Dia, thank you so much for joining us. I'm just talking about a theme that you, of course, have been particularly closely involved with, and which was saving the tiger, something that I remember you being very actively involved in the campaigns with about 15 years ago, and the tiger is looking quite safe. So talk to us about the tiger and the other campaigns that you've been involved with.
Thank you for having me, Vikram. It's always nice talking to you. I have a lot of credit to give you for the fact that I choose to give voice to many of the environment and, of course, wildlife campaigns in the country, because it was through you that I realized that there were a lot of good people doing good work, but it was being done in silos. And a vast majority of civil society was extremely disconnected from the need to improve environmental consciousness and do more. And you really set me off on a path, and I'm very happy to be on it.
Thank you so much for that, Dia. I'm always happy to get unwarranted credit where it is not due. But okay, thank you so much. Frankly, I don't think I had much to do with it. But I'm so glad that you started lending your voice and your face for good causes. You did it. You started lending your voice and your face for environmental causes. But is that a trend now that you think is catching on and that many other people are starting to do? And is that something that's really important?
Oh, absolutely. We recognized when we started that tiger campaign, when we said we only had 1,400 left, that we needed to do so much more. I remember discovering how our forest rangers would walk close to 25 kilometers a day, bare feet sometimes, or in literally rubber chappals, not have adequate, just amenities and uniform and things that they needed to survive the extremities of the work that they did. And then, of course, over the years, I've discovered so much more. But it's a win in terms of the rise in numbers, surely. But unfortunately, the rise from the last count to the one that we're looking at right now is not much to celebrate, because it's also pretty evident that we're losing many more tigers to disconnected forests, to all kinds of conflict arising out of man-animal interactions. And we need to do a lot more to improve on that situation. Having said that, I think India is a great example of how a program like Project Tiger can not just secured habitats for tigers, but also secured biodiversity habitats for so many other species. And we always say that the tiger is the metaphor for all nature. So when we save our tigers, we're actually saving ourselves sources of fresh water and so much more that we need for our health and survival.
Right. Now, when you're talking about numbers starting to plateau, is it that potentially we are starting to hit the carrying capacity for the habitat for the tiger and for many other animals? So you're going to have to figure out how do we create the habitats where more and more animals can actually thrive. Otherwise, you will hit a limit. You can't go on increasing the numbers without expanding the habitat.
Yeah, that's the evidence that is coming forward. At least that's what all the scientists are saying. And it's not hard to understand. Each tiger, a male tiger needs a certain amount of area to survive. And there is with the rise in numbers, there is a shortfall of that area, and when they start moving from one forest to another, from one in search of more area, they usually get killed. I was looking at something that Anish Andheriya was talking about, and he said that the Western Ghats was supposed to be like a prime forest area for tigers, but not anymore, because there's a lot of disconnection that is happening, and that's not helping. But I think realistically, we are the world's largest, have the world's largest wild tiger population, which is a great win, and it's a wonderful thing. But we do need to consider how much more area we can give our tigers, and how, actually more than just giving more areas, how can we better connect our forests and keep those connections, corridors secure?
You are extending some of the activism that you often do also into the films that you're doing. So speaking of Bheed, your latest film, it's about migrants and it's about their experience during COVID. Tell us a little bit about that.
I feel like I'm on a path where all of my choices are aligned. I am fortunate enough to be a part of stories that really are focused on just improving, consciousness, helping people make better choices, but also kind of giving people the opportunity to discover the truth. And Bheed was a very brave film. The director chose to talk about a subject that I don't know many filmmakers would be brave enough to speak about and tell an entire story on, especially given the backdrop of the migrant crisis. And of course, he not only delved in the subject of the crisis itself, but also spoke about the caste system. And there's so many layers within the narrative that are so integral to the storytelling. And I feel so proud that we were able to tell the story. I feel like it's an academic film, Vikram. It's a film for the ages. People will look back at this story and learn a lot from it. But more than anything else, it was a call to conscience, and it's a deeply empathetic storytelling, and I'm very proud of it.
All right, Dia, thanks a lot for joining us. Great chatting with you as always. And that's all we have for you this week on The India Story. But do remember to keep watching us every week to get a sense of what's really happening in the world's largest democracy and the fastest growing economy on the planet right now. All the issues, all the highlights, and all the big newsmakers. Thank you for joining us. Bye for now.